Welcome to Schloss Leopoldskron, the headquarters of the Salzburg Global Seminar. My guest has been taking part in a session on women and economic growth. Poonam Barua, you are founder chairman of the Forum for Women in Leadership. What is that?
The Forum for Women in Leadership is a very unique organization which is totally independent, founded by the women executives of corporate India, and which is totally devoted to leveraging the talent pool of women, sharing best practices for women in the workplace, and mentoring women for leadership positions. In short, it's going to reinvent corporate India.
That's very interesting, because you also lead the Women on, is it Corporate Board series?
Yes.
In India. So is that linked to the
Yes,
forum?
It is something that I started as part of the Will Forum, because I believe there's not enough to do things just at the middle level or the top level. You have to get onto the boards. If there are 5% women who are on boards in India, that's a dismal number. So we have to attend to it. So we're doing this Women on Corporate Board series, which will qualify women for boards and actually will put out a roster of independent women directors so that everybody says, stop saying that we don't have qualified women. They actually have a pool to draw from.
Is this your first visit to Schloss Leopoldskron?
No, I was at the Schloss many years ago as a fellow, and I'm now here as part of the faculty, and I'm totally enchanted by the Schloss. And one of the things that enchants me is what I came here for initially as a fellow. And I had Slovenians, I had Russians, there were Italians, Hungarians, and we sat by the lake all night, and we hardly slept. Until today, we bond with our Salzburg fellows, we visit them. So the Schloss is a place of rich bonding for me. It represents rich enchantment. It represents history. It represents transition. It represents friendship. It represents knowledge.
When was that you were here before?
I think it was in the 90s, early 90s. There was a session which was on Japan, Europe, and North America towards a G3 world. So you can imagine how way behind it was. But it was a fascinating time. It was an absolutely fascinating time.
And you've kept in touch with the people you met there?
Yes, there are 5 of us who still meet at least once or twice a year, and most of them are from Europe, Italy, Hungary, Slovenia, Austria, and Turkey. And I'm the only one from India, but I travel 8-9 hours to come, because we don't just meet, we do things. We talk about emerging markets, we do programs in the universities. I have hosted them in India. So there's coalescing of ideas that continues to take place. And when we were initially at the Schloss and we went back, I remember we were doing postcards because there was no internet. That is how strong the passion was to continue the dialogue, not to be in touch with each other, but the dialogue was so rich that you didn't want to lose it.
Well, that's a wonderful testimony to this place, but of course the building is the Schloss, but it is the spirit of the Salzburg Seminar.
Yes.
Now, Salzburg Global Seminar, but I suppose when you were first here it was the
Right.
Salzburg Seminar. Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to abandon you very shortly to the Untersberg. Now, if you look across the lake from Schloss Leopoldskron, you will see the mountain, the Untersberg, and that is where you will be stranded. But I will allow you to take 3 works of art or entertainment which somehow have something to do with the special qualities of women, women's empowerment, if you like. That's the way it's been described in the discussions. So what would your first choice be?
My first choice, as you can see by what I told you about the Schloss, is that I am a slave of knowledge. And anywhere where I will get knowledge, I will follow. So the first thing I will take with me on this abandoned, beautiful spot would be the painting of the goddess of knowledge. Her name is Saraswati. And Saraswati is part of India's many gods and goddesses, but in India we have in the Hindu mythology a trinity. And the trinity has got Lord Brahma on top, who's the preserver, and has got Brahma as the creator, Vishnu is the preserver, and then we have Shiva, the destroyer. And Saraswati goddess is the consort of Lord Brahma. And Saraswati is the one who gives everybody the power of speech, wisdom, and learning. And she has 4 hands, and it's fabulous. And the hands stand for the mind, the intellect, alertness, and ego. But what I like about Saraswati is that she has this very fabulously calm demeanor. She has a musical instrument called veena in her hand, and she plays the veena. So she also has literature in one hand, where she has a book. She has a lotus flower, which stands for knowledge, in another hand. She has the veena, which stands for the aesthetics. And she's always in white, which stands for purity. So actually I have a photo of a painting of Goddess Saraswati on my desk, and I would like to take it with me, because every time I look at her, I remember that knowledge will be the key.
You shall have the goddess. What's your next choice?
My next choice would be, and although we're talking about women, women are really a segment of the whole humankind race, and so we should not be really looking at them in isolation. And I cannot view it in isolation. So the second thing I would take to this wonderful spot to meditate would be a book called the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita is one of the oldest books written thousands and maybe 4,000 years BC, before Christ. And the Bhagavad Gita is one of our finest epics. And that is where the Western world has understood the word karma, K-A-R-M-A. Do your duty. It's an epic of the Mahabharata, which the Bhagavad Gita is based on. And it's really a lecture by Lord Krishna to Arjuna. But what has it got to do with women? Arjuna was one of the 5 brothers who ruled the kingdom. And there was one woman that all 5 of them were married to, and her name was Draupadi. And so she was the queen of Hastinapur. And she was married to all these 4 brothers. And the brothers had cousins called the Pandavas, who were their enemies. So the Bhagavad Gita tells you this wonderful story about how the Pandavas, one day, one of the Pandava brothers, his name was Yudhishthir, and he was gambling with the Pandavas, and he gambled his whole property, and he gambled his palace, and he gambled his brothers. Finally, he had nothing else to put on the stake, and he put his wife Draupadi on the stake. And Draupadi gave him a lecture, which I really like. She says, if you have lost everything, I am not your property. How did you put me on the stake? So, to think that so many years ago there was this woman, this part of history, who actually had the understanding and the wisdom to say, I am not part of your property because you've lost all your property. But he put her on stake. And then, when the time came and he lost her, the Pandavas at night started stripping her. And she prayed to Lord Krishna. And as they started stripping her sari, the layers and layers and layers continued all night and all morning and for hundreds of days. And it never finished. These are the kind of stories that inspire you in mythology. That, if you do your duty, if you understand the wisdom, this is all about, it's a very small section of the whole Mahabharata and of the Bhagavad Gita, but it continues to tell you the lesson that, whether it is men or whether it is women have the capacity to understand what is their duty, what is their right, what is the power of prayer, and how to stand up for your own rights. And, the story of Draupadi is very well known, and I would love to take the Bhagavad Gita every day to read at least one. It's got 700 verses. I would read at least one verse every night. At least I would get 700 days through.
You might need that.
Right.
And what's your final choice?
My final choice is a human being that the whole world knows, who's Mahatma Gandhi. And, I'm a strong follower of Mahatma Gandhi's values and value systems, because I believe that there is nothing, something he said was very interesting, which is that there is no peace without truth. Ultimately, it's all the truth. So why would I choose his book, and which book would I choose? He has actually written a book which very few people read, and which is actually not even available now. It's called My Experiments with Truth. And most people know him for non-violence, but actually Mahatma Gandhi's message was the message of truth. And if you find this book, you should read it. And actually, I have a copy with me because my father used to read this book. And in that book, My Experiments with Truth, it's a very thin book, but you could read it over and over again. He talks about the reform of women's rights. And that was his experiment with truth. And he talks about child marriage, the fact that in those days, child marriage, people used to marry off girls at the age of 14, 15. He talks about young women's death. He talks about widow remarriage, which nobody used to talk to in India. He talked about education. He talked about banning the parda system, And in that book, he also writes that the place of the woman is not in the kitchen. That he and how he experimented with all of that. Not that he's saying it. He has experimented with it, and he also talks a lot about his wife. He talks about his relationship with his wife, which was not the best. That's why it's called My Experiments with Truth. And a lot of it I cannot probably say here, but...
you can say anything.
Yeah, but he experimented with his relationship with his wife in that book as well. And, what does he think about a husband and wife's relationship? And how difficult it is sometimes to maintain that relationship because women have their own rights. That is what he was trying to say. And how he was experimenting women's rights. It's a fascinating book.
When was this written?
It was written during his lifetime, just before, if the freedom movement started sometime in, the mutiny was around 1857, so we're really talking about that time period. If we got independence in 1947 in India, so he's written that book sometime in maybe 1940s, and it's like I said, it's one of the most candid expressions of Mahatma Gandhi's inner self, not all of which is good. That is why he's saying My Experiments with Truth. But he talks a lot about women's rights in that and how he experimented with his wife on understanding those rights. And it's a book I would take because it's a book which gives me inspiration to always experiment with your own self. You mustn't always wait for somebody else to give you the answer. You have to experiment it. It's all try and error. Put yourself on the block. Until you put yourself on the block, until you understand what is right and what is wrong, you can't tell anybody else. You don't have the right to, you don't have the authenticity to, you don't have the integrity to. So it's a fascinating book.
This is going to be very difficult for you, Poonam, because in the event of a blizzard, and you'll rush to a small cave on the Untersberg and take shelter, you would only be able to take one of those 3 works with you. What would it be?
Oh, I would take My Experiments with Truth. I'm a connoisseur of truth. I believe that that's going to save me. Ultimately, it's going to save me. If I hang in there with truth, in whatever I do, I'm going to be saved. That blizzard doesn't have a chance.
Poonam, thank you so much for being our guest on the Untersberg.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasure.